It's funny. When we think about a country's economic destiny, we're almost universally trained to view it through this lens of incredibly simple arithmetic.
Right, just basic addition and subtraction.
Exactly. Like if you have a growing population, you get a growing economy. You have more hands to work, more mouths to feed, more consumers buying refrigerators and cars, and therefore the GDP line just naturally goes up.
It's the standard formula.
Right. But on the flip side, if you have a shrinking population, the conventional wisdom says you get economic stagnation. It's treated less like an economic theory and more like, I don't know, an immutable law of physics.
It really is. It's presented as a total binary. More people equals more aggregate output, which equals a stronger nation. Fewer people equals an inevitable, uncontrollable decline.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's the entire foundation of the panic we see in global headlines every single day about birth rates.
Right, the whole demographic winter thing. It's a clean narrative, broken or not broken. And, I mean, it makes intuitive sense to most of us. If a city loses half its residents, you expect to see boarded up shops, right? Not a booming tech sector.
Exactly. And it is deeply comforting for policymakers to believe that, too. We like our macroeconomic models to be visible. We like them to be easily categorized by sheer volume.
Give me a big chart going up and to the right.
Right. If the population graph is going up, the politicians can take credit for a healthy economy, even if that economy is incredibly inefficient. Volume masks a lot of structural flaws.
Oh, that's a great point. But then you step into the world of modern demographic shifts and, well, structural transformations, and suddenly that simple, comfortable calculator is completely shattered.
It really is.
We are looking at a data landscape today that is, honestly, totally counterintuitive. It violates that fundamental law of physics we just talked about.
It is the absolute definition of an economic paradox. And it's a paradox that challenges almost everything we are taught in standard development economics about how a nation actually builds wealth.
Welcome, everyone, to another deep dive. I am so thrilled you're joining us today because we have a truly unique mission. Today, we're unpacking a fascinating, custom-tailored academic presentation.
It's a really incredible piece of work.
It is. It's a 15-slide deck built entirely on a mountain of macroeconomic and social development data spanning from 1990 all the way to 2024. And the data paints a picture of a very specific, very real national transition.
The topic of this research is titled Serbia's Paradox.
Yes, and we're going to use this specific national data set as a lens to examine a global question. Because the paradox we're looking at here is the exact puzzle that, dozens of countries across Europe, East Asia, and eventually the entire globe are going to have to solve over the next century.
Absolutely. This isn't just about one country in the Balkans. It's a preview of the global future.
Exactly. I want to set the visual scene for you, the listener, based on the introductory slide of the research we're looking at. Imagine a minimalist, stark white canvas. There's no clutter, no distracting 3D effects, just pure, unadulterated data visualization.
Just the numbers speaking for themselves.
Right. So on the left side of your screen, there is a red line charting a severe downward plunge. That represents total population. It is just dropping year after year like a rock rolling down a hill.
It's a very aggressive slope.
It really is. And then on the right side, there is a dark blue line that rockets aggressively upward, and that represents per capita wealth and high-tech exports.
Moving in the exact opposite direction.
Exactly. And right in the middle, sitting right between this plunging red demographic line and this soaring blue wealth line, is a giant flat question mark.
It is a brilliant visual hook. It doesn't try to explain the phenomenon immediately or soften the blow. It just throws a contradiction right in your face.
Yeah, like explain this.
Right. The math isn't mathing, according to the traditional models.
So, that is our mission today. We are asking this central question. How does a country that is rapidly losing its population and therefore losing the traditional demographic dividend that we always hear about, how does that country manage to more than double its wealth and exponentially grow its tech sector?
The stakes here are incredibly high because, as you said, we are taught that a shrinking population means economic doom. An aging society is supposed to be a bankrupt society.
The pension system's collapse.
Exactly. The pension system is supposed to collapse, innovation is supposed to die out, and the economy is supposed to stagnate. But today we're going to look at the hard, data-driven narrative of how a nation used quality, capital, and technology to substitute for sheer quantity.
Let's start with the pain point. Slide 2 of this deck. We need to look closely at that plunging red line, because to understand the miracle, you first have to understand the sheer scale of the crisis.
You really do.
The data lays out a disappearing workforce. We are looking at a total population that dropped staggeringly from around 7.5 million people down to approximately 6.6 million.
Just pause on those numbers for a second and really think about the scale.
It's massive.
Losing nearly 1 million people in a country of that size is not a statistical anomaly. It's not a slight dip. That is well over 10% of the entire population just vanishing.
Wow.
It is a seismic demographic event. It changes the physical landscape of a country.
It really does. That's hundreds of thousands of people who aren't buying groceries, who aren't paying income tax, who aren't starting businesses.
Right.
And here is where the data gets genuinely scary. It's not just that there are fewer people, it's who is left behind. Concurrently with this population drop, the data tracks the old age dependency ratio.
This is the crucial metric.
Right. And for those who might not live and breathe economic terms, this is the percentage of the working age population needed to support the elderly. This ratio climbed from under 10% to over 30%.
That's a staggering jump.
Visually, the data is presented as this dual axis chart. There's this gray area graph showing the overall population sinking, and layered right over it is a dark, jagged line showing that dependency ratio climbing, with these stark, black circles highlighting the recent peaks.
What's fascinating here is the structural reality hidden inside those percentages. This isn't just a slow leak of talent to other countries, though, immigration obviously plays a part.
Sure.
It's a blaring structural alarm bell. The data explicitly shows that for every 3 active workers in the economy right now, there is 1 elderly person to support.
Wait, I need to stop you there because I want to make sure I'm visualizing the gravity of this.
Yeah.
Imagine a factory where every year 3 workers have to suddenly carry the financial weight of a retiree.
Okay.
A few decades ago, you had maybe 10 or 15 workers sharing the tax burden to support 1 pensioner. Now it's down to 3. Usually, if a business faces that kind of overhead, it is bankrupt.
Instantly.
Right. The pension burdens, the healthcare costs, it completely crushes the margins. I have a really hard time understanding how the whole macroeconomic system didn't just collapse under that mathematical reality. Like, how does the government not go bankrupt paying for that?
That is the exact right question. And it's precisely why the standard economic models predict doom. If those 3 workers were doing the exact same jobs, generating the exact same amount of value as the 10 workers did a generation ago, the economy would absolutely collapse.
The math just doesn't work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The tax base wouldn't be able to sustain the social safety net. So to avoid that national bankruptcy, the country couldn't just keep doing the same work with fewer people.
They had to change the game.
They had to fundamentally change what the remaining workforce was doing. They had to increase the value of every single hour worked by a massive multiplier. And that leads us directly to the first great pivot shown in the data on slide 3. A massive historical shift in the structure of labor.
And the data visualizing this shift is, honestly, violent. It's a 100% stacked column chart showing the structure of employment over time. The portion of the population working in agriculture plummeted.
Dropped off a cliff.
We are talking about going from nearly 40% of the workforce, almost half the working adults in the country, down to a mere 1.5%.
That is an agrarian society transforming into a modern service economy in the blink of a historical eye.
It's crazy.
A shift like that usually takes a century. Here, we're seeing it compressed into a few decades.
Right. In the place of agriculture, the services and industrial sectors completely absorbed the workforce. They became the core engines of employment for both men and women.
And look at how it's visualized.
Yeah, the slide uses these giant arrows, a thick downward arrow over the shrinking agriculture section, and a massive upward arrow over the surging services sector. And the core text annotation here is that structural release of labor is the first step in productivity.
Let's break down the mechanics of why that is, because it's not immediately obvious to everyone why leaving the farm makes the whole country richer.
Yeah, please do.
So moving from agriculture to services is the classic first step in structurally releasing labor. Here is the reality of traditional agriculture in a developing economy. It often hides massive underemployment.
What do you mean by hidden underemployment?
Imagine a small family farm. You might have 5 people working that plot of land. They're all technically employed in agriculture. But practically speaking, that plot of land only really requires 1 person with a decent tractor to yield the exact same amount of crops.
Oh, I see.
So those other 4 people are working, sure, but their marginal productivity, the extra value they are adding by being there, is close to zero. They're essentially tracked in low-yield labor.
Ah, okay. So when the population starts shrinking, you can't afford to have 4 people doing the work of one tractor.
Exactly. By moving those people out of the fields and into industry and services, you immediately boost the baseline productivity of the nation.
Because now they're doing something else.
Right. The one person left on the farm gets a tractor and produces the same amount of food, and the other 4 go into the city to work in manufacturing or services, creating entirely new value. The overall GDP jumps, even if the total population is shrinking.
Okay, I hear the economic theory, but I have to push back on the reality of this.
Yeah.
You can't just tell a farmer to drop their plow, walk into a city, and suddenly become a digital services manager.
No, of course not.
How does an entire society make that leap without leaving millions of people completely behind? I mean, you don't just walk out of a cornfield and into a software firm. There's a massive skills gap there.
You're absolutely right to be skeptical, because that is where many developing nations actually fail. They empty out the countryside, but the cities don't have productive jobs, so you just end up with massive urban slums.
Right, exactly.
But the data shows how this specific transition was managed. It wasn't just about opening more local coffee shops or retail stores to absorb these workers. If we look at slide 8, the telecommunications and infrastructure data shows a massive, deliberate construction of what we call a digital floor.
The digital foundation. Yes, looking at the data from the telecommunications agencies, the percentage of internet users and fixed broadband penetration just surged.
It skyrocketed.
It's visualized as this great half-circle gauge chart, like a speedometer, showing internet adoption redlining to near total saturation. The note points right to it. Digital floor for IT outsourcing.
The telecommunications data, the broadband penetration, the explosion of mobile cellular subscriptions per 100 people. This proves that a completely new infrastructure was being aggressively laid down across the country. You aren't just shifting labor, you are upgrading the terrain they work on.
Okay, how does laying broadband fix the skills gap of the farmer moving to the city?
Because it's a generational stepping stone. It's not usually the 50-year-old farmer who becomes the coder overnight.
Right, that makes sense.
It's the farmer's child. But to make sure that child doesn't just become a low-wage manual laborer in the city, you need infrastructure. This broadband foundation was strictly necessary to support high-value digital service trade and IT outsourcing.
So they can connect to the rest of the world.
Precisely. If you have widespread, reliable internet, a young person in a transitioning economy can suddenly plug into the global services market. They can do customer service for a European company. They can do data entry. They can start learning to code online. The digital floor allows the workforce to bypass traditional, heavy industrialization and jump straight into the global digital economy.
Okay, I'm tracking with you. The internet acts as the bridge. But wait, building that digital floor, laying all that fiber optic cable across rural and urban areas, setting up the 4G and 5G networks, funding the educational shift, that requires serious, heavy capital.
Oh, a structural leap of that magnitude is incredibly capital intensive. You need billions to build the physical infrastructure, train the workers, and actually capitalize the new firms that will hire them.
But here is the massive catch in this paradox. With a shrinking domestic base, a shrinking population, that capital couldn't possibly come from inside the country.
No, it couldn't.
If you have an aging population, people are drawing down their savings for retirement, not investing in risky new tech ventures. There just wasn't enough domestic savings to fund a national economic overhaul of this size.
Precisely. This is the trap that catches so many countries facing demographic decline.
Yeah.
If you don't have the human capital in sheer numbers, and you don't have the domestic financial capital to upgrade the people you do have, you are mathematically stuck.
So where does the money come from?
The money has to come from outside. It is the only way out of the trap.
Which perfectly explains the next massive data trend we need to look at on slides 4 and 5, the financial fuel that powered this transition. We are talking about foreign direct investment, or FDI.
The economic blood pump.
Exactly. The data shows that FDI net inflows experienced massive scale-level explosions in recent years. We are looking at billions of dollars flowing in. The visualization highlights a gray bar chart of the last 5 years, boxing it in and calling it the golden age of FDI inflows.
And we need to look at what that FDI actually purchased. It didn't just purchase real estate, it purchased economic resilience. Because running parallel to that FDI explosion is the chart for gross national income, or GNI, per capita.
And this is where my jaw genuinely dropped when I looked at the sources. Measured in purchasing power parity, and let's define that quickly for the listener.
Sure.
Purchasing power parity, or PPP, means this is measured in constant 2021 international dollars. It accounts for inflation and the actual cost of living in the country. It's a measure of real, tangible wealth, not just currency fluctuations.
Right, it measures what people can actually afford to buy in their daily lives.
Exactly. And measured in PPP, the GNI per capita more than doubled. It rose from a historical low of around $10,397 to a staggering $24,600 and beyond.
It's an incredible trajectory.
The visual on slide 4 is just a single dark line launching upward with this vertical double arrow highlighting the absolute difference. The note literally says, wealth realized, an astonishing double growth.
Let's break down the mechanism of how foreign money creates that kind of domestic wealth jump. This is the textbook definition of capital substituting for labor.
Okay, unpack that for me.
When a country lacks internal capital accumulation and is staring down a severe labor shortage due to demographics, foreign capital acts as an artificial workforce.
An artificial workforce. Walk me through that.
Think about a traditional manufacturing plant. If you want to double your output, you usually hire twice as many workers.
Right.
But what if those workers simply don't exist because your population is shrinking? You use foreign direct investment to buy advanced robotics, automated assembly lines, and better software.
Ah, I see.
That foreign capital buys the technology that replaces the missing human hands. That golden age of FDI isn't just about foreign companies opening branch offices to sell things to the locals. It is a critical survival phase where foreign machinery and technology are literally replacing the missing labor force.
Wow.
And because machines and software are highly efficient, the few workers who are managing them become hyperproductive, which drives up that GNI per capita we just talked about.
So it's basically a massive automation push funded by outsiders. It reminds me of a scrappy tech startup that realizes it has a major bottleneck.
How so?
Let's say they have a massive database to manage, but they can't afford to hire 100 manual data entry clerks. They just don't have the headcount, the budget, or the office space.
Okay.
So what do? They go out, pitch to venture capitalists, take that VC money, and buy an automated software system instead. They use outside cash to completely bypass their lack of manpower.
That's a great way to put it.
This country essentially used FDI as national venture capital to automate and upgrade its economy because it didn't have the demographic growth to do it the old-fashioned way.
That is an incredibly apt analogy. The FDI buys you time. It stabilizes the macroeconomic ship. It provides immediate employment for that newly transitioning service sector workforce we talked about earlier.
Right.
And it immediately boosts baseline wealth, which is why you see that GNI per capita doubling. It proves unequivocally that you can generate twice as much wealth with fewer people if those people are highly capitalized.
I love the startup analogy, but I have to play devil's advocate here.
Please do.
Startups that take too much VC money often end up losing control of their company. If a nation relies entirely on foreign direct investment, aren't they just becoming a branch economy?
That is a very real risk.
Right. Like, you can't just be a passive recipient of foreign cash forever, basically acting as the outsourced factory or customer service center for German or Chinese or American companies. If another country suddenly offers cheaper labor, that FDI vanishes overnight. There is a ceiling to that strategy, right?
You are hitting on the exact vulnerability of the FDI model. Relying solely on foreign capital leaves you incredibly vulnerable to global capital shocks.
Exactly.
If interest rates rise globally or geopolitics shift, that money can flow out just as fast as it flowed in. To achieve true escape velocity, a developing nation has to transition from imported capital to domestic innovation. They have to graduate.
They have to own something.
Yes. You have to start creating your own intellectual property, your own brands, your own high-value exports.
You have to invent your own future rather than just assembling someone else's.
Precisely.
Yep.
And that is exactly the pivot we see in the next phase of the data on slides 6 and 7.
Which brings us to the innovation boom, or what this research brilliantly terms the engineered dividend. And listener, if you thought the wealth jump was impressive, the innovation metrics are wild.
They really are.
First, R&D spending as a percentage of GDP climbed to nearly 1%. It hit 0.99%.
Now, to a listener in the US or South Korea, 1% might not sound like a lot.
Right, we're used to much higher numbers.
But for a transitioning economy of that size, moving from a near-zero baseline to dedicating 1% of its entire gross domestic product to research and development is a massive, deliberate allocation of resources toward the future. It's money that isn't being spent on immediate consumption. It's being planted as a seed.
And it paid off in human terms. The density of researchers spiked dramatically. The data shows it going from around 1,190 researchers per million people to over 2,515 per million.
They more than doubled their concentration of scientists, coders, and researchers.
The visual here is this dual axis chart where the R&D spending is a gray step line climbing up, and the researcher density is these deep blue columns that just get taller and taller. And there's this great annotation. Density of talent doubled, transitioning to the engineer dividend.
What's fascinating here is the deliberate pivot in economic strategy. We started this conversation talking about the loss of the traditional demographic dividend. The economic boost a country gets when it has a massive boom in young, cheap, working-age people.
Right, the traditional growth model.
What this data shows is a country actively engineering a replacement, the engineer dividend. They realized they would never win a global competition based on the volume of cheap labor.
Because they just didn't have the bodies.
Exactly. So the wealth generated by the FDI phase was directly, intentionally channeled into building technological capacity.
And we have the proof that it wasn't just academic research staying in a university lab. This wasn't just about publishing papers. It translated to cold, hard cash on the global market.
Oh, absolutely. Look at slide 7.
Yes. The high-tech export values went completely exponential. We are looking at a shaded area chart here where the curve just goes vertical. High-tech exports skyrocketed from roughly $264 million to over $1 billion. There's even a little rocket icon on the chart showing the inflection point.
The steep curve in high-tech exports as a percentage of all manufactured goods is the ultimate proof of concept for this entire strategy. It proves that this domestic innovation successfully translated into hard export revenue.
Right.
They're building highly specialized, high-value products, advanced electronics, proprietary software, IT services that the rest of the world is willing to pay premium dollars for.
So the math changes completely. They figured out that having 1,000 highly trained engineers exporting proprietary software is vastly more lucrative than having 10,000 workers exporting raw agricultural goods or basic textiles.
Mathematically, yes. The value add per capita of a software engineer or a biotech researcher is exponentially higher than that of an agricultural laborer. It's how you break the linear relationship between population size and economic output.
Okay, the math on this engineer dividend makes perfect sense in a vacuum. But I have to stop you, because there is a glaring hole in this theory.
Okay, let's hear it.
We just established extensively that 1 million people disappeared from the workforce. The youth cohort is smaller than it has ever been. You can't just spawn a generation of tech workers out of thin air.
It's true.
If the pool of people is shrinking so drastically, how on earth is the pool of specialized elite talent getting so much larger? Like, where are they finding these brains?
That is the crux of the entire paradox. It is the most vital part of this nation's strategy, and honestly, it's a lesson for the rest of the world.
Unpack that for me.
If you have a massive population, say 1 billion people, you can afford to have a wildly inefficient education system. You can afford to let millions of people fall through the cracks because just by the law of sheer numbers, you will still produce enough geniuses and engineers to run your top industries.
Right. The sheer volume guarantees a certain amount of elite talent. You'll get your top 1% regardless.
Exactly. But if you have a rapidly shrinking population, you cannot afford to waste a single brain. Every single child born is a critical macroeconomic asset.
Wow.
You have to maximize the potential of every single human being within your borders. And this realization leads directly to a massive systemic overhaul in the nation's human capital strategy.
Let's look at the receipts for that overhaul, because the data on human capital starting on slide 9 is staggering. The foundation of this new talent pool is a radical democratization of education.
The numbers are really impressive.
The percentage of adults 25 and over with at least a bachelor's degree reached roughly 20%, 1 in 5 adults holding a degree. The visualization is this elegant waffle chart, a 10 by 10 grid where 20 of the squares are shaded in dark blue, illustrating that high-capacity talent pool.
Think about the distance traveled there. From an agrarian society where most people only needed basic primary schooling to work the fields, to a society where 20% of the adult population is holding a university degree.
It's a huge leap.
You are building a massive, deep reservoir of highly trainable cognitive labor. But 20% is just the baseline. To really understand how they maximize the population, you have to look at the demographics of who is getting that education.
And this is where the gender data on slide 10 absolutely blew my mind. When you look at the demographic breakdown of this new educated class, a fascinating pattern emerges. The data tracks gender equality in education, specifically looking at the Gender Parity Index, or GPI.
This is such a critical metric.
This index hit approximately 1.0. This means girls and boys are participating in education at exactly the same rates. There is absolute mathematical balance. Furthermore, female primary school completion reached nearly 100%.
Which is incredible.
The visualization uses this back-to-back horizontal dumbbell chart showing the male and female data points perfectly symmetrically aligned. It highlights that 1.0 GPI, noting it means they aren't wasting any potential.
This raises a profoundly important point, and we need to view it through a very specific, almost cold, macroeconomic lens. In many parts of the developing world, gender equality in education is viewed primarily as a social goal. It's championed by NGOs as a human rights milestone, which of course it is.
Right, it's the right thing to do.
But in a country facing severe demographic collapse, achieving a 1.0 gender parity index and 100% female primary completion is not just a moral victory, it is a hardcore, non-negotiable economic survival tactic.
I want to expand on that because it's such a crucial aha moment. Think of managing the economy like managing a sports team.
Okay, I like this.
If you are a massive country, you have a roster of 1,000 players. If your coach is biased and decides he's only going to let the left-handed players train, it's stupid, it's unfair, but you still have 500 players to put on the field. You can still play the game.
You can still field the team, even if it's suboptimal.
Exactly. But this country is managing a sports team with a very, very small roster. If you only have 15 players total on your team, every single one of them needs to be trained to an absolute elite level. You cannot afford to leave anyone on the bench.
You literally can't.
If a shrinking society ignores the education of women or subjects them to systemic barriers that keep them out of the STEM fields, they are literally leaving 50% of their potential engineer dividend on the bench. You will lose the game entirely.
Exactly.
You won't have the engineers to drive the high-tech exports. Misogyny, in this context, is literally economic suicide.
That is perfectly stated. When population growth is off the table, the complete, unhindered release of the female workforce's cognitive potential is the only mathematical way to meet the labor demands of a high-tech export economy.
Right.
If you need 10,000 new software engineers to keep your economy growing and your youth population is tiny, you need every single capable young woman in that lab and at that keyboard.
But education is only half the human capital equation. Right. You can build the best schools in the world, but if the population isn't healthy, it doesn't matter.
Exactly. The other half is keeping those minds alive and healthy. And this requires a fundamental shift in how the state views healthcare.
Which brings us to slide 11, and perhaps the most emotionally resonant, profound data in this whole research set. The data shows what is visually described as a scissors gap.
It's a very striking chart.
One line is plunging aggressively downward, and the other is steadily, stubbornly rising. The plunging line is infant mortality. Over the timeline of this data set, infant mortality saw a drastic, almost miraculous decline from nearly 30 deaths per 1,000 live births down to under 5.
That's a huge public health victory.
And at the exact same time, the rising line shows overall life expectancy steadily increasing across the population.
The scissors gap graph is profound when you place it in the context of our central paradox. When you pair a plunging infant mortality rate with a rising life expectancy in a country that is structurally losing its total population, what you are seeing is a healthcare system fighting tooth and nail to preserve every single addition to that shrinking population.
It's the ultimate expression of valuing quality over quantity. If the birth rate is high, sadly, historically, systems tolerate higher infant mortality because the sheer volume of births masks the loss.
It's awful, but it's historically true.
But if you are only going to have a few children born each year, you must ensure that almost 100% of them survive, thrive, get educated, and live long, productive lives.
Every single life saved by bringing that infant mortality rate down from 30 to under 5 is a future worker, a future researcher, a future consumer who will support that aging demographic.
It's all connected.
Yes, the human capital investment, the 20% university graduation rate, the 1.0 gender parity, the intense healthcare focus, this is the bedrock. This is the soil that allows the foreign direct investment to be absorbed effectively. It's what allows those high-tech exports to be generated. It is a fully integrated, holistic, national survival strategy.
Okay, so let's pause and look at the board. They've managed to transition. They've built this highly educated, gender-equal population. They are producing high-tech goods. They have the engineers.
Right.
But here is the next logistical nightmare. A brilliant engineer making a groundbreaking microchip or writing a world-class software suite still needs a smooth mechanism to sell those goods to the rest of the world.
You need the infrastructure to move it.
Exactly. They need good roads, both literal and metaphorical. You can't be a global tech hub if your customs department uses paper ledgers from the 1980s, or if your trucks sit at the border for 3 days waiting for clearance, or if an entrepreneur has to bribe 5 officials just to register a software company.
You are hitting on the vital role of the state, the institutions, and the infrastructure. Innovation does not happen in a vacuum. You could have all the smart people in the world, but if the institutional environment is toxic, that talent will simply emigrate.
They'll just leave.
Exactly. It requires an enabling environment to keep the talent home and get their products to market.
Let's look at the institutional guardrails first, on slide 12. The data tracks government effectiveness and regulatory quality using worldwide governance indicators. According to the data, these metrics stabilize around the 40th to 60th percentiles globally.
Now, I want to be very clear and analytical here. We are merely reporting the statistical percentiles as they appear in the institutional data. We are looking at the macroeconomic impact of these percentile rankings without taking any sides politically.
Right, we are just looking at the numbers on the radar chart. But I have to be honest, a 40th to 60th percentile ranking doesn't sound like a roaring success.
It's very middle of the road.
If I bring home a test score in the 50th percentile, that's a C-. It's decidedly middle of the pack globally. How does a mediocre regulatory environment support a high-tech boom? Shouldn't they need to be in the 90th percentile, like a Singapore or Switzerland, to pull this off?
It's a great question. And it speaks to a major misconception in development economics. We often think countries need perfect 99th percentile governance to become wealthy. But what's fascinating here is the concept of good enough governance.
Good enough.
Yeah. You don't always need a perfect regulatory environment to trigger an economic boom. You just need enough stability and predictability.
So perfect is the enemy of good.
Exactly. While the regulatory quality has faced fluctuations, staying in that medium to high level, that 40th to 60th percentile, provides just enough predictability to protect the private sector's growth.
I see.
It gives foreign investors enough confidence that their contracts will be honored in court most of the time. It gives domestic engineers enough space to start companies without being suffocated by red tape or excessive corruption. It is the good enough institutional soil for the high-tech seed to grow. It prevents the state from getting in the way of the engineers.
That makes a lot of sense. You just need to clear the runway enough for the plane to take off. And then there are the physical links to the world, mapped out on slide 13. The data shows a massive focus on logistics. There's a minimalist network node chart representing the Logistics Performance Index, or LPI.
The LPI is huge for them.
The improvements in LPI allowed trade to maintain a massive, disproportionate share of the overall GDP. And this is absolutely crucial to understand, because this is a landlocked regional economy.
For a landlocked country, logistics are literally a matter of life and death. You don't have deep water ports to cheaply ship massive containers of low-value goods.
You can't just put it on a boat.
Right. You have to physically integrate your economy into the rail and highway networks of your neighbors and thereby into global supply chains.
Because if you are making high-tech components, they have to reach the assembly plants in Germany or Asia exactly on time.
Exactly. The fact that their trade remains such a high percentage of GDP means their logistics infrastructure, their customs efficiency, their digital tracking, the quality of their highways is successfully moving those high-tech exports out of the country and into the global market efficiently. They overcame the geographic penalty of being landlocked by being fast and digitally integrated.
Okay, so let's review the victory lap. They solved the demographic collapse by pivoting from agriculture to tech-driven services. They secured the FDI to fund the transition. They achieved total gender parity to train the engineers. They built the digital floor. They stabilized the regulations to good enough. And they smoothed out the logistics to integrate globally.
It's quite the checklist.
It sounds like a total, flawless victory. The paradox is solved. But just when you think the story is over, slide 14 brings the music to a screeching halt.
Because in macroeconomics, solving one generational crisis almost always uncovers the next one. The reward for winning the game is just a harder level.
The research identifies this explicitly as the next boss battle, and it reveals a massive looming threat to everything this country has built.
The energy trap.
Yes. The data uses a waterfall chart showing the carbon emission intensity of GDP, placed right next to a pie chart breakdown of the national energy grid. And it shows an economy with a heavy, heavy reliance on hydropower, which fluctuates wildly between 26% and 37% depending on the year, and an overwhelming reliance on high-carbon fossil fuels for the rest.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the tragic paradox of modern development. As you successfully transition from a quiet agrarian society into a booming high-tech digital and industrial economy, your energy demands absolutely skyrocket.
Right.
Think about what powers this new economy. Data centers for the IT outsourcing, advanced manufacturing plants for the tech exports, the massive digital infrastructure of that 4G and 5G network. All of that requires massive, uninterrupted 2,047 baseload power.
And right now, that power is coming from incredibly vulnerable and dirty sources. Let's talk about the hydropower first. Hydropower is clean, sure, but it is deeply vulnerable to climate change.
Exactly. If you have a severe drought year and the rivers run low, your hydropower output plummets. When 30% of your grid is dependent on river flow, a drought means your tech sector faces rolling brownouts. You can't run a global IT services hub if the servers lose power every afternoon.
So they have to fall back on the fossil fuels, but that creates a completely different existential economic threat.
Right. Relying on high-carbon fossil fuels for the majority of your power means your entire export economy is carbon-intensive, and the global market is changing rapidly.
The green tariffs.
Yes. The European Union and other major markets are implementing carbon border adjustment mechanisms, essentially green tariffs. If your high-tech exports are built using dirty coal power, they are going to be slapped with massive taxes when you try to sell them abroad.
It's like they've spent 30 years painstakingly building a high-performance sports car, this brilliant, efficient tech sector, and they are finally flying down the global highway at 100 miles per hour. But now, the global market is telling them they have to completely swap out the dirty combustion engine for a clean electric one while they are still driving at top speed.
That's exactly what it's like.
If they slow down to fix the grid, they lose their competitive edge and the FDI stops flowing. But if they don't change the engine, they get priced out of the market by international carbon tariffs and their economy crashes anyway.
That is the exact tension. It's an incredibly precarious balancing act. The green energy transition is the massive roadblock standing between their current success and their future sustainability.
It's a huge challenge.
All those brilliant engineers they spent the last 2 decades training. Their next decade of work can't just be writing software for export. It is going to have to be focused internally on rewiring the national grid, building renewables, and upgrading the power infrastructure without bankrupting the state.
Okay, we have covered an incredible, sweeping amount of ground today, looking at over 30 years of data. Let's synthesize this on slide 15. Let's bring it all back to the central premise of the research, the conclusion of the paradox. We started with a giant question mark. How does a shrinking country not just survive, but double its wealth and become a tech exporter?
And looking at the totality of the data, it has provided a very clear 3-part blueprint for a national strategic shift. A blueprint for how to use quality to replace quantity.
Let's lay out the pillars of that blueprint. The slide shows 3 cards. Pillar 1 is fundamentally about human beings, symbolized by a brain icon, offsetting a massive population disadvantage by aggressively, almost ruthlessly, maximizing human capital.
Right.
You ensure your healthcare system fights for every infant to survive. You achieve total gender parity in schools because you can't afford to leave half your talent out of the workforce. And you push 20% of your adults through higher education. You simply do not waste a single brain.
Exactly. Pillar 2, with the rocket icon, is about structural agility. You actively jump from low-yield, underemployed agriculture directly into tech-driven services.
Yeah.
You use foreign direct investment as venture capital to buy time, build infrastructure, and automate. And then you leverage your highly educated population to create an engineered dividend, resulting in exponential high-tech export growth.
Yeah.
You make your money from patents and code, not from sheer volume of labor.
And pillar 3, with the green leaf icon, is about foresight. You recognize that the fight isn't over. You accept that your institutions just need to be good enough to let the private sector run, but you prepare your logistics and your energy grid to face the next massive hurdle, which is the green energy transition. You have to clean up the engine that powers the sports car.
Which leaves us with something really profound to consider, reaching far beyond the borders of just this one country. In a world where policymakers, economists, and daily headlines constantly panic over declining birth rates and aging populations across Europe, Asia, and the Americas, we are deeply conditioned to believe that fewer people automatically equals national decline.
We really do treat it like the apocalypse. We assume a shrinking population is the end of the story.
We do. But looking at the cold, hard data of this paradox, we have to step back and ask a fundamentally different question.
What's that?
Is our absolute obsession with endless population growth a flaw in our economic thinking? Are we relying on a lazy model of growth that just depends on adding more bodies to the machine?
Oh, wow.
Think about it. What if a shrinking society, forced by sheer demographic terror and necessity to value every single citizen's education, health, and potential, is actually the secret recipe for a wealthier, smarter, and more highly skilled future?
That's a huge thought.
What if running out of cheap labor is the exact catalyst a nation needs to finally invest in its own people?
That is an incredible thought. What if the broken calculator is actually a feature, not a bug? What if demographic decline is the ultimate forcing function for human progress? I want you, the listener, to really mull that over. Next time you look around at the demographic panic in the news, ask yourself if we're just failing to see the opportunity for an engineered dividend in our own societies. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the data. Stay curious, keep questioning the simple arithmetic, and we'll see you next time.